not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws confiscated from a Harlem sanctuary. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by the Schaefer Award Theater and will not star Natalie Woods and Steve McQueen or Bullwinkle and Julia. The revolution will not give your mouth sex appeal. The revolution will not get rid of the nubs. The revolution will not make you look 5 pounds thinner because the revolution will not be televised, brother. There will be no pictures of you and Willie Mae pushing that shopping cart down the block on the dead run or trying to slide that color TV into a stolen ambulance. NBC will not be able to predict the winner at 8:32 on report from 29 districts. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of Whitney Young being run out of Harlem on a rail with a brand new process. There will be no slow motion or still lights of Roy Wilkins strolling through Watts in a red, black, and green liberation jumpsuit that he has been saving for just the proper occasion. Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and Hooterville Junction will no longer be so damn relevant, and women will not care if Dick finally got down with Jane on Search for Tomorrow because black people will be in the street looking for a brighter day. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no highlights on the 11 o'clock news and no pictures of Harry armed women liberationists and Jackie Onassis blowing her nose. The theme song will not be written by Jim Webb or Francis Scott Keys, nor sung by Glenn Campbell, Tom Jones, Johnny Cash, Engelbert Humperdinck, or The Rare Earth. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back after a message about a white tornado, white lightning, or white people. You will not have to worry about a dove in your bedroom, the tiger in your tank, or the giant in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not go better with coke. The revolution will not fight germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.
Hello, I'm Harvey Dong from Eastwind Books of Berkeley. Eastwind Books of Berkeley is a location that provides access to Asian American and ethnic studies books. The store has been in Berkeley since 1982, and myself and B Dong, my wife, we continued it since taking it over in 1996. First, I want to acknowledge that we sit on unceded Hui Chin Ohlone lands. We want to thank the Ohlone peoples for use of the space. Second, I want to congratulate authors Jetta Martin, Joshua Bloom, and Waldo E. Martin Jr. For writing today's featured book, Freedom, the Story of the Black Panther Party. This is a book that brings to young readers the histories and lessons of the Black Panther Party. About the authors who will be speaking in this order. Jetta Grace Martin is a debut author from the San Francisco Bay Area. She earned her bachelor's degree in social sciences and African American studies from Harvard University. Jetta is also a dancer, performer, and choreographer who has performed nationally and internationally, and whose choreography has been presented by the Museum of African Diaspora and the Black Choreographers Festival. Jetta is the recipient of the Cornell West Prize and the Catherine Ann Huggins Prize for her research on race, embodiment, and Joshua Bloom, next, is director of the Social Movements Lab and faculty in Sociology Department at the University of Pittsburgh. He studies the dynamics of insurgent practice and has been published in the American Journal of Sociology, American Sociological Review, and other venues. He is also the principal author of Black Against Empire, The History and Politics of the Black Panther Party, published by UC Press in 2016, which won the American Book Award. And he was also the co-editor of Working for Justice, the LA Model of Organizing and Advocacy. And before earning a PhD, Joshua has spent many years as an anti-racist organizer. Finally, Waldo E. Martin Jr. is the Alexander F. and May T. Morrison Professor of History and Citizenship at UC Berkeley. He is the author of No Coward Soldiers, Cultural Politics in Post-War America, Brown versus Board of Ed, A Brief History with Documents, and The Mind of Frederick Douglass, and also co-author with Joshua Bloom of the book Black Against Empire, The History and Politics of the Black Panther Party. Aspects of the modern African-American freedom struggle and the history of modern social movements unite his current research and writing interests. Okay, so next we'll begin with a presentation by Jetta Grace Martin.
Hi, everyone. It's funny when Zoom tells you things. It told me to unmute myself. Hello. So hi, everyone. My name is Jetta Martin, and I'm one of the authors of Freedom, the Story of the Black Panther Party, along with Joshua Bloom and my dad, Waldo E. Martin Jr., who are both here this afternoon. Before we get started, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So a little about me. I have wanted to be a writer ever since I was young, and I've written stories for as long as I can remember. Early on, I had this period where all of my stories started with, it was a dark and stormy night. Every single story started with, it was a dark and stormy night. Doesn't matter what went on to happen in the plot, they all began that way. So luckily, I have expanded my options a little bit since then. I'm very happy to share this particular book with all of you, my first as a published author. I was honored and excited when I was asked to round out this team that would bring freedom to life. My dad, Waldo Martin, and Joshua Bloom co-authored the comprehensive history of the Black Panther Party for adult readers entitled Black Against Empire, which Harvey mentioned and some of you may have read. You also might have attended the wonderful event that Eastwind Books gave a few years ago to mark the occasion. I was there. I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of background about the party, and then I will read a short excerpt from the text. In the fall of 1966, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Huey Newton was born in Monroe, Louisiana. Bobby Seale was born in Dallas, Texas. Both of their families were part of a Black migration headed out west, looking for more opportunities. The two men met in Oakland at Merritt College, and that's where they founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. So the birthplace is Oakland, California. One of the political ideas that they were introduced to at Merritt that continued to inspire them was that Black people in the United States were an oppressed colony within the US. So this idea linked them to oppressed peoples across the globe. The Panthers also believed that capitalism was at the root of the problem. As Black Panther Fred Hampton said, racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. The party's initial main concern was police brutality in the Black community. They organized and armed themselves legally in self-defense. When the Panthers' very first recruit, Lil Bobby Hutton, was murdered by the police at age 17, thousands of people attended his funeral in Oakland. Many people were changed by the experience and decided to change the course of their own lives. Branches of the party began to sprout up across California and the country. There were branches in Los Angeles, New Haven, Seattle, New York, just to name a few, and the international branch of the party headed by the Cleavers in Algiers. In early 1969, John Huggins was murdered along with Bunchy Carter. Throughout the rise of the Panthers, the state attempted to repress them, oftentimes with extreme violence. Infamously in the instance of the murders of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. The FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, wanted to prevent what he called the quote unquote rise of a Black Messiah. And the killing of 21-year-old Fred Hampton was part of the move to stop this. Hoover also called the Panthers the greatest threat to internal national security. The state realized the power that the party had, the power that they could have, and went to great lengths to stop it. The Panthers' belief, their message, was that all people could truly be agents of positive change, even against great odds, that we as people do truly have the power. As they said, and as the back of our book reads, all power to the people. The Panthers dared to dream of a different kind of world and society where Black people, where all people could truly be free, mind, body, and soul. The first point of the Panthers' 10-point program under the heading What We Want was just this. Number 1, we want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black community. The Panthers approached this goal from multiple angles: armed self-defense, free healthcare clinics, the free breakfast program for children, the Oakland Community School, the running for public office, and many other avenues. The Black Panther Party had branches all over the US and the world. Even though the party closed its last office in 1982, the example of the party continues to inspire. The Panthers fought for Black liberation and social justice, goals that we as a society are still striving for. The lessons of the Black Panther Party are still relevant today. We are still grappling with the effects of slavery and Jim Crow and systemic racism inherent in our society. We are still witnessing the very real effects of police brutality and violence against Black people. The revolution, the act and the remaking of our world is not a static thing. It is changing and evolving with us and around us. As you heard earlier from the piece by Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will be live. My hope is that this book can be an inspiration, a small seed planted to help activists of all ages grow, aspire, and work toward their best lives as individuals and as members of a community, to participate and agitate and work to make the kind of world we all want to live in. So I'm going to try to show some pictures because I think it's important, if you haven't seen the book, to be able to see some of the visuals and the pictures that we have inside because it's really beautiful. And then I'll read a little bit from the book. So let's see if I can do this. I think I can. All right, here we go. Okay. Yes, hopefully we can all see the pictures. So I'm just gonna start this. So we have some pictures of members of the party. This is a crowd gathered to hear Eldridge Cleaver speak. Party members with Kathleen Cleaver on my left. And that's the cover of the book. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what it looks like. It's a really beautiful book. Let's see. All right. So now I'm gonna read a little bit from the book and then I'm gonna hand it over to Josh. I feel like I saw some, questions. Yeah, if anybody has questions, we will try to answer them at the end. So I'm gonna read a little bit of a sample. See, it looks like this. You saw, this is what I was talking about. All right. Here we go. This is the prologue. There is an ancient saying, knowledge is power. The secret is this. Knowledge applied at the right time and place has the potential to change history. Knowledge is more than power. It's magic. That's what the Black Panther Party did. They called up this magic and began a revolution. In the beginning, it was a story like any other. It could have been yours and it could have been mine. But once it got going, it became more than anyone could have imagined. It's the story of Huey and Bobby, Eldridge and Kathleen, Erica, Elaine, Fred, and David. It's the story of the women and the men of the party, their supporters and allies, the community survival programs, and the 10-point program. It's about Black revolution, Black radicalism, about Black people in America. It's about loyalty, community, and sacrifice. It's about what it takes to be free. And this is the story of the Black Panther Party. Chapter 1. In the dark, anything can happen. Blackness, darkness has a power unto itself. Faces reside there, strong, determined, and proud, unapologetic in their blackness. A large afro, a halo of power, dark sunglasses glinting in the half-light, crisp leather jackets and cocked berets, a uniform with meaning, figures cutting across the frame, Black and proud. It was late at night. Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and little Bobby Hutton were cruising around in Bobby's car. The year was 1967. The place, Oakland, California. As Huey drove, they noticed a police car patrolling the area. Huey sped up to tail the car, keeping him in sight. They glided behind, silent and watchful. What the officer couldn't see was Huey's shotgun, Seale's .45 caliber handgun, or little Bobby's M1 rifle. When the officer turned right, Huey turned right. When the officer turned left, Huey turned left. After a while, they all pulled up at an intersection, side by side. The three men turned, looking into the police car. Bobby held Huey's gun. Their weapons were clearly visible. Huey's law book lay waiting across the back seat. They paused, waiting for a breath. Then they accelerated, moving ahead of the officer. His high beam started flashing, but Huey refused to stop. The flashing light meant nothing to him. When the officer put on his siren, Huey finally pulled over right across the street from Merritt Community College. Huey knew the area well. Merritt was a mostly Black school where both Huey and Bobby were students. The officer burst out of his car yelling. Young Black men and women stood, having just come out of class, observing the scene. Quickly, a crowd began to gather. The officer came closer, screaming, "Get out of that car!" Huey turned, cool and collected. "You ain't putting anybody under arrest. Who the hell you think you are?" The officer snapped. He pulled open the car door and stuck his head inside, reaching across Huey to grab the barrel of the shotgun that Bobby was holding. Bobby pulled back. Huey sprang into action. He grabbed the officer by the collar, slamming his head against the roof of the car. Huey then turned in his seat, kicked the officer in the stomach, and threw him out of the car. Huey jumped out, holding his shotgun. Standing tall, he jacked a round of ammunition into the chamber. He spoke loudly, for all to hear. "Now who in the hell do you think you are, you rotten fascist swine, you bigoted racist? You come into my car trying to brutalize me and take my property away from me?" Bobby and little Bobby Hutton jumped out of the passenger side of the car. Bobby pulled back the hammer on his .45. The officer lifted his hands from his own gun, backing away. For the rest, you would need to get this book called Freedom. Okay, well, yes, that is the end of what I have to say. Before I hand things over to Josh, I just want to say thank you again so much for being here. And we are encouraging people to send their questions to us, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jetta, and thank you to Harvey and to Janie for organizing this. I want to say a few things about how we came to write this book. Some of you may be familiar, and Jetta just was talking about Black Against Empire, which Waldo and I spent well over a dozen years writing and researching. And so why freedom? And we were actually approached by the publishers of the Harry Potter series and the guy who discovered J.K. Rowling, and they said that they had read Black Against Empire and wanted to do something for a younger audience. And Waldo and I were really excited to jump on that opportunity for a couple of reasons. We have been thinking about doing a book that was accessible to a younger audience and that was really character driven. But there were also some real unexplored questions that we, in Black Against Empire, we really are focused on the politics of the party. And we're trying to figure out, how do the Panthers build power, and why does the revolutionary politics of the party that really becomes the center of Black freedom struggle in the late 1960s and early 1970s, why does it depart in such a stark way from the successful civil rights movement that preceded it? Nonviolence, claims for participation in the US. So why does this form of power develop in Black freedom struggle, where people are no longer saying, kumbaya, I want to be a part of the US, I want my citizenship rights, I'm going to do this in a nonviolent way? Why do people take on a revolutionary project? Why do they pick up the gun? Why do they join international struggles against colonialism and imperialism? Why do they branch out and really say, we need to actually overthrow the state? Why does that politics work in that moment? What can that teach us today about how people build power from below? And one of the things that we did not get to dig into as much as we wanted to in Black Against Empire was the personal experience. What was it like for people in the party to be a part of this movement, to be a part of this revolutionary struggle, to put down their daily lives and say, I am going to put everything on the line for freedom. I'm going to put everything on the line for freedom. So we really wanted to dig into that sort of that personal question of what that experience was like and what that was about for people to take on this revolutionary struggle. And Waldo and I are both, we're faculty and we are juggling a million things, and we really wanted to do a project like this, but it was not clear how it was ever going to happen. And then Jetta sort of stepped in. And it was just like magic, because Jetta is such a beautiful writer. She understands how YA literature works and was able to really create something that I don't think we could have really imagined. And what really grew out of this project, I think, is an important answer to that question, and one that I want to spend the last few minutes here talking about a little bit, because I think that there's something that is really important for today that comes through in this book that Jetta really helped to really manifest and tease out and make sense of. And that's the experience that she alluded to in her opening remarks of freedom. When you think about that story that Jetta was telling from the prologue, of Huey standing up to the police with guns, saying, okay, we are not going to be brutalized, right? That's very much putting his life on the line, right? Bobby and little Bobby and Huey putting their lives on the line to stand up against police brutality. And Huey had a way of talking about this, right? And he talked about revolutionary suicide. And this idea was that giving your life for the people was a revolutionary act. And he would say, a revolutionary act, giving your life for the people, is heavier than a mountain, right? People are taking risky actions all the time. People are killing themselves all the time. People are doing things that are getting them killed all the time, but for selfish reasons and reasons that don't really build a greater freedom. And he said, that's reactionary suicide. It's lighter than a feather. But to stand up against oppression in a way that actually works, right? It's not just about being brave, right? It's not just about being, courageous. It's not just about doing something that's audacious. It's about doing it in a way that really seizes, right? In Bobby's phrase, it seizes the time, it seizes the moment, it catalyzes the real political possibilities of the moment. And what Huey and Bobby did in that moment, and what the Black Panther Party then did more broadly, was they figured out that there were lots of people, both in the Black community, that were struggling against police repression, against ghettoization, against poverty, but also for example, young Chinese immigrants of children of Chinese immigrants who are struggling to get a foothold in the U.S. and were also excluded, right? You think about also the Brown Berets and the Chicano young people that were part of the same milieu who were trying to figure out how to get a foothold. And what the party did, and it's on the back of the book, All Power to the People, is they said, the Black freedom struggle is not a separate issue. We are all fighting part of this global struggle against imperialism. That's true for Chinese Americans. It's true for Chicanos. It's true also in the anti-colonial struggles abroad, right? And so all power to the people means that our struggle for Black liberation, our struggle to challenge police brutality, to challenge poverty, to challenge ghettoization is part and parcel of this global struggle against imperialism. And what they did is by setting their politics in that way, they were able to create these alliances where what happened was in the challenges, all those grievances came into play. People felt that when Bobby and Huey were standing up to the police, they were also representing their own freedom struggles, right? And so there were lots of people that came to the fore to support it. And this is what it made so difficult to repress, right? This is the power that the party was able to create, was that they created a politics in that moment in a way that civil rights action no longer could, right? Civil rights action could stop Jim Crow, but how do you sit in against police brutality? How do you sit in against poverty? And so this is what Huey and Bobby did. And in creating that politics, what they did was more than just creating power, they created a source of freedom. Because when you are able to put your life on the line and you know with a confidence that that action is going to actually be able to change things in some capacity, then even if you're killed, you are free because your action is unstoppable. And what you see is that you see that same dynamic with Rosa Parks, right? We think, oh, she just sat on the bus. Well, in post, Waldo knows this history better than I do, but in post, in post-World War II Jim Crow, right, sitting in the front of the bus was a death sentence, right? Think about Isaac Woodard, right, in Alabama, who the driver, took him, emptied his revolver into him, threw him on the street, and he was not killed, but he was severely wounded. And the local sheriff comes, recognizes the situation, and puts a bullet in Isaac Woodard's brain, right? You cannot resist, right? So, but that act of sitting in the front of the bus, despite the severe consequences, Rosa Parks was free because she could be repressed, but she could not be daunted because she had a politics that resonated with the moment. And I think that in some ways, in this moment, we're seeing exactly the same thing with Zelensky in Ukraine. When he says, I am here, I am not going anywhere, you can bomb me, you can kill me, and he very well may get killed, right? He was offered, he could come, the US would pull him out, he could get free passage, right? But he said no, because we have a project here of Ukrainian independence. And so many of us feel that project because we can imagine those tanks rolling onto our streets, right? We have our own struggles at stake. And so he has a politics in the same way that Huey's standing up to the police. He has a politics that resonates with this moment, that resonates with our grievances. And in taking that action, even if he is killed, he is free. And that's what I think comes through in this book.
All I can say, Brother Josh, preach on. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. I've known Harvey and Bee since the early 1990s. I count them among my close, good friends. I see Eastwind Books as a powerful and important community institution, one of the great bookstores. I assume most of you under the sound of our voice know something about the bookstore, but do continue to support it. I want to also shout out a memory. When we did the initial sort of publicity for Black Against Empire, one of the most memorable events was indeed the one at Eastwind Books. And so it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here today. Because I can really go on like the Energizer Bunny. I do have 4 things I want to say, and I'm going to try to keep it brief to make sure that we have time for the questions. First, I want to emphasize the importance of facilitating the understanding of the youth. As Josh pointed out, Jetta, whose middle name is Grace, it was sort of like Grace when we found out that, yeah, Jetta can actually do this. And so it's a blessing to me to have written a book with one of my great friends in the universe and my oldest daughter. So I want to make sure that that is clear. But I think we're both committed to this idea of youth empowerment and trying to make comprehensible and legible to that audience the history of the party. And one of the things that I'm really catalyzed about it personally is thinking about the fact that most of the members and a lot of the activists who affiliated with and supported the party were indeed youth, were indeed students, were indeed under 30. And as Josh articulated so beautifully, took it upon themselves to push a particular kind of politics that stood up to power and sort of a transformed world. And so I think one of the things that I hope the book does and we attempt to provide is sort of inspiration, a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. For things to change, you have to be able to dream, you have to be able to imagine, you have to be able to envision. And we see the party's history as part of that long struggle of people affirming who they are, figuring out ways to move forward and engaging in the struggle to do that. And it's important that our young see that, understand that, and try to figure out in the world of which they are a part, how they might make a difference. And so one of the things that I think the book does is sort of think about the role of the youth, the role of students, the role of youth activism, student activism in helping to transform a world. And what we hope is that this story will inspire and affirm, generations of youth. And the other thing, being a historian, I'm very committed to this idea of seeing how youth activism, student activism across the 20th century has transformed not only the United States, but indeed the globe. And I see the party's history as part of that. And I think it's important that the youth, that students see that other youth, other students have made history, and they too can make history. The other thing that it comes through, amazingly in the book is this effort to try to think through one of the arguments that Josh was sort of working out, and that's sort of Black power, the Black power challenge to that civil rights paradigm. And one of the ways I like to think about it, and I think the book does this quite well, is to think about how that moment of Black power is indeed exemplified, personified by the party. One of the ways I think the book sort of tries to make this clear is, if you're trying to understand Black power politics, central to that world, the Black Panther Party is one among a number of Black power organizations and the like. But in a lot of ways, the Black Panther Party is the straw that stirs the drink. They really are, for a number of years, the principal exponent of a brand of Black power politics. And how and why that happens, I think, is something that needs to be understood. And we try to make that comprehensible to a youth audience. Because most of my students still do not have, I mean, I'm talking about elite students at Cal, the movement ends, with the death of King or something, and then there's something called Black Power, but they have no clue. And then when they think about the Black Panther Party, it's very, it's poorly understood and misrepresented. And so I think what we try to do is to get that history of civil rights, Black power, make that comprehensible, make that understandable. The final thing that I want to say, and this builds upon what Josh had to say, and I thought he worked, sort of began that conversation trying to think about the Ukrainian moment quite well. And the other way to think about this is the direct, and my way of thinking about it, the direct connections between the emergence of Black Lives Matter, another sort of movement that, that comes from the people, another movement that one of the primary catalysts is sort of youth and students, the young, and how and why at a particular moment that movement seizes not only the national imagination, but the international imagination. And thinking about, in the history of Black youth, student, young, radical protest movements, what is the connection? And I think Josh is working on a project now, so Josh can chime in here. But I do think that we can see the continuing relevance of the kind of activism, the kind of protest, the kind of agitation, the kind of oppositional resistance politics that the party personified. And the final thing I want to say is, I don't really think you can understand what I would call the Black freedom struggle, dating back to the enslavement of Africans on the continent down to today, without understanding the tradition of resistance. And you can't understand sort of the modern Black freedom struggle without understanding the centrality of the Black Panther Party. And so without further ado, I want to turn it over to, we'll handle some of the questions, because Josh, Jetta, and I are very much committed to trying to respond to your questions and your concerns.
There's one question here. It's a comment and a question from Professor Silence. Love the revitalization of the Black Panther Party from a positive perspective. Is a purpose of this book to spark a contemporary Black Panther Party in this new generation? If not, but it does. Would the author or authors speak in favor or against the formation of a contemporary Black Panther Party in, say, 2022? Okay. contemporary relevance.
Who's going to touch this one?
Uh,
Go ahead.
I think each generation must make and write its own history. I think the historical moment of the party was a particular moment. And so I don't think you can replicate what the party did. What I think is that current activists and current freedom fighters will come to a sense of what kind of organizational or structural formations they need to create. I think this is one of the geniuses of the Black Lives Matter movement. In structure and in organization, it's very different from what the Black Panther Party was, but I think it responds brilliantly to the historical moment. And so I think what we can do is we can study the party, we can learn from the party, but trying to replicate that, I don't, as a historian, I don't believe that's the way to go. I really believe each generation has to be free to think and imagine and dream its own world, cognizant of the past, cognizant of, the constraints within which they live. And it seems to me, and Josh, and I know you have thoughts about this, that Black Lives Matter it actually did this.
Yeah, I'll just build on that a little bit. And I agree 100% with what Waldo's saying. And I think the reality is it's impossible to emulate. I mean, because the situation is different, right? So we were talking a little bit before we started this public session, and Harvey brought up H.K. Yuan, who was, an immigrant of Chinese descent, and who is doing his PhD at Berkeley and working on, he worked under Popper for a while, and he actually ended up going to all the different meetings on campus of the Panther activities and other anti-war activities and Third World Liberation Front activities and all these different movement activities. And he very much was of a milieu of people who were trying to figure out how to build this kind of power from below in the context of anti-colonial struggle, right? So you think about the period in which, right, the late 60s, in which the Panthers were doing this. This was a period of decolonization, right? The Panthers had an embassy. They had an embassy in Algiers when the US government did not have an embassy, right, in Algeria. They had, Cuba was, had a military training ground that they were developing for the Black Panther Party. You had a lot of the people who were supporting him, reading the paper and getting involved in the legal defenses. And these things were folks who were involved in the draft resistance, right? So right now we have no draft resistance. We have no independence, revolutionary struggle internationally, right? We have a very different set of political constraints, right? So the idea that that you can do the same kind, build the same kinds of relations with the same kinds of other actors, it just it's just physically impossible because the situation is different. And so what I think we can do, and what I hope that comes through in the book, is that I think that there's a question that Huey and Bobby and the party was asking, looking at the civil rights movement, right? They were saying, hey, we can't just sit in, right? We can't do the same as the civil rights. We can't do the same as Rosa Parks. We can't just emulate the same tactics. What we have to do to be successful is understand the deeper logic. So what does it mean to be free in this moment? And so in those ways, I think Waldo's point is really a good one, that in many ways, Black Lives Matter is the contemporary Black Panther Party, because what they've done is they've asked that question in an effective way. How do we stand up to the character of our oppression today? and how do we build power from below to address it?
Jetta, did you want to unmute first?
I feel like I could talk about this for a really long time. I'll just say I agree, but I feel very strongly in what has been brought up, that it's context, time, and place specific. I think we all know that some of the tactics that the Black Panther Party used at the time just would not work today. It just would not work. And so I don't think I ever had in my mind that the reason we were writing this book is the idea for there to be like another Black Panther Party. My idea from sort of my understanding of the world was, you read about something that happened, it's history, but it's still obviously relevant and resonant. As I've said before, when I was writing about the murder of Fred Hampton, George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor was murdered, just right when I was writing that. And I had to take a step back. I was like, I can't write this book right now. I'm too emotional. It's too much. And I came back a few days later and I said, okay, do this because it's important. Do this because it's resonant. Do this because this is still happening. And so in a way, right, like, what am I doing? I'm writing this book. That's part of what I'm doing to try to help with the struggle. And I think there are multiple ways people can help. And I heard someone say in sort of an activist meeting, one thing about kind of staying in your lane. I love to write, so my lane is writing, but people have different lanes, right? But I don't think that the solution is to emulate or to copy what has been done in the past. I think you take the spirit, you take the inspiration, you take whatever you want to call it, the chutzpah, whatever you want to call it, the political theory, the organizing, the local, like, I'm looking in my community. What does my community need? People need a free busing program. That's what we're going to do. So keeping it local, keeping it organized, all those things, great. But I don't think recreating something that was so time and place specific, I don't think that that's the answer.
Okay. And then I had a question. In the book, there's I think in the epilogue, the writer, I assume it was Jetta, had the conversation with Erica Huggins about the role of women in the Black Panther Party. And she was commenting about how most of the books begin with the men and they end with the lives of the men. But the approach that this book took was to actually bring out the story from the viewpoint of both women and men in the Black Panther Party. Yeah. I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit about that. Yeah.
I can go first, I guess.
Yeah.
It was a very conscious decision, right? I am who I am. It was very important to me that, of course, it is historical nonfiction, and we're building on all of the scholarship and research that my dad and Josh did in the interviews and everything. We're not, we're not creating anything, right? Like these are the things that, to the best of our knowledge, things that happened. A lot of what I did is I went down into sort of firsthand accounts and used the people's words, but I was trying to be clear that these were their words or their recollection of something that happened in the past. But it was really important to me that even though the party was started by 2 men in 1966, I wanted to be really clear that women joined right away. It was really important to me that people understand that at the height of the party, over 60% of the members were women. It was really important to me to uplift the stories of women as much as I could. There's a mural on a private house in Oakland that has all pictures, or I guess drawings of women of the party. I think the idea is just to sort of and that was, the visuals in the book, when we were going through the book, and sometimes it's permissions, it's whatever it is, but I think it was maybe page, I don't know, let's say 88. And up until then, there were no pictures of women. And I said, we can't have this because we're working really hard as a team through the writing to have a really as balanced as we can, a story that we're telling. And so it also has to be reflected in the visuals. So that was one thing that I felt really strongly about. And also with the collage on the front, having a balance and having it not just be the key players that most people know, but having it be just like a lot of sort of everyday people. And for me, that was another thing. I love the phrase brothers on the block. It's the idea is that the party was made up of people, right? Like you and me and all of us, like people, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, right? And so I really want it to feel like, okay, they're like, it's a party of the people. But yeah, it was really intentional and conscious about making sure that the stories of the women of the party were uplifted and focused on.
Another question is related to the role of government in terms of the COINTELPRO program, because you mentioned the murder of Fred Hampton in one part. But I think for the people in the audience here, what was COINTELPRO about, and how did they operate in terms of what role did they play in terms of dismantling the Black Panther Party? Yeah.
Josh, you want to handle that?
Sure.
Oh dear, I get this.
I mean, I think part of what is so striking about the story, I mean, you know, the early on, the party was really recognized as being powerful by the state. And, you know, sometimes in the portrayals, it's just, you know, sort of a personal vendetta or personal issue by J. Edgar Hoover, but that's not the case. I mean, this was Nixon, this was the National Security Council, this was all the higher levels of the federal government, as well as the local authorities and police departments around the country, that really quickly, you know, targeted the party as a really powerful threat. And the ironic thing is that it's oftentimes not the guns that we're seeing as the most threatening, it's the breakfast programs, right? And a lot of the behind the scenes writing is really clear about this. I mean, certainly if you look at some of the memos in the FBI, you know, there's very clear discussion and directives about, look, what we need to do is stop the political alliances. We need to get in the way. And in fact, the breakfast programs are the most threatening component, because that's where the real source of support comes from. And what's so astounding about the party, to some degree, isn't just that they were able to you know, sort of be courageous and stand up and disrupt business as usual, and then were perceived as a threat and were repressed, but that with all that repression going on, and it was extreme, right? I mean, there were a couple dozen Panthers killed, some, you know, like Fred Hampton, targeted and assassinated in their bed, you know, others in a whole series of different kinds of confrontations, all kinds of provocations. You know, we mentioned earlier John Huggins and Bunchy Carter in LA, who were actually not killed directly by the police, but they were killed by organization, the US organization, that was, you know, instigated through a whole counterintelligence program that was very intentionally and explicitly developed to create armed conflict and to, you know, to stop the party and to stop the power that it was building. Part of what's so astounding is the fact that the harder the state came throughout 68, 69, and into 70, the more the party grew. And I think that that's really, you know, there were these great questions earlier about what would it be to really learn from the party today and to, you know, replicate some part of the party's politics. And you know, Jetta talked in the prologue, right, about the magic, right? Is that really, it wasn't just this blind courage. It was reading the moment so precisely and being able to have a politics that really did speak to people's hearts and speak to those grievances. In the same way that Zelensky taking that stand, right, really resonated with so many people around the globe, right? And it becomes irrepressible, right? So you think about it in the context of the Ukraine, right? They can kill Zelensky. Russia has the tanks, NATO's gonna probably stand on the side. They can take state power for a while in the Ukraine. But Ukraine's never gonna bend at this point, right? And that's the brilliance of that stance, right? Is that saying, no, we are gonna have self-determination. We're not gonna embrace this, right? The being able to read the situation in a way that speaks to such a broad set of people and where their hearts are and where their grievances are and where their interests are, it becomes irrepressible. And that's what you see, is that the harder the state came, the more Panthers that were killed, the more raids on offices, the more the party grew. The party was teeny in the beginning of 68, and it grew some through 68, and then a lot more through 69. And those were the periods of the hardest, most intense repression. So part of the lesson, that I hope people can see here too, is that a politics that really speaks to people's hearts becomes irrepressible. Of course, the state's going to step in. Of course, the more of a challenge that you have to the power as it's constituted, whether it's the privileges that white people have, whether it's the advantages of capital, right, and of wealth, whether it's immigration status, right, citizenship, right? Whatever those advantages are, whether it's patriarchy, right? You stand up to power, and people in authority will step in to repress you. But I think that the lesson we can learn from the Panthers is that there are ways to read the situation and to speak to broader people's needs and interests in a way that becomes irrepressible.
Any other comments? Hey, what about this? The Black Panthers, you could say, were the pioneers in establishing third world studies and ethnic studies, because weren't they the first to, in their program, to put in 0.5 Black studies, and then off of that, it influenced the third world movements like at SF State and then in Berkeley, and then it becomes statewide and nationwide. The campus and community connection there, like they came to Berkeley campus to rally for support, and then students supported the Black Panther movement. So this idea of coalition building was a pretty big feature there, right? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think what the book shows is a theme that Black Against Empire also shows, and I think it was very explicitly dealt with in a lot of what Josh was talking about: allies, coalitions, fellow travelers, understanding the big tent, understanding the ways that the organization has to speak to larger, broader concerns. I think that comes through in freedom, and I think what Jetta is able to do, especially, is to think about sort of some of the more contemporary resonances and how do you feed that back into the narrative. And but to me, allies, coalitions, fellow travelers, supporters help to sustain the party in those periods of that intense repression. And so you have to have people standing with you, standing beside you, and fighting the good fight with you. But I think that's absolutely critical.
I think that helps pull everything together for today. Definitely I want to thank today's speakers, Jetta Martin, Joshua Bloom, and Waldo Martin for speaking. We covered a lot of ground today, and we encourage the audience to purchase a copy of Freedom, the Story of the Black Panther Party. It's available at Eastwind Books of Berkeley. The website is www.asiabookcenter.com. And we also have available the earlier book, Black Against Empire. Okay, so thank you for attending, and we'll see you at our next event.